Hey everybody, Mackenzie Brown here. I am here today to teach you guys how to do an Olympic recurve nocking point. So we're going to tie these on. My string is served with Halo, Halo .014 size serving. And one of the important things that I have found about nock tying is that you don't want to have the same material. No matter what you prefer to tie your center serving with, you want to make sure it's a different material. And the best pairing that I have found has been Halo for the center serving, and then I use Power Grip. Both from BCY, both really great products. The Power Grip is also .014. It's going to be a smaller diameter on the braided serving, but Power Grip holds on really tight and is just a great way to tie nocking points. So what you're going to need today to tie your nocking points are going to be your material. Like I said, I'm using Power Grip 14. And you're going to need a lighter to burn the ends in the nocking point. You're going to need a T-square, which is really handy in any recurve archer's quiver, as well as a knife. I'm using a Havilon knife. It's going to be really sharp and just going to cut really precise for me. So we're going to start by taking the Power Grip and taking a good size amount of, I'd say that's probably about 1.5 feet of the Power Grip, and just going to cut that off. And we're going to need 2 of those. It doesn't matter if it's a little bit long, it's fine. You just don't want it too short so you can know how to tie your points and make sure you've got enough space. So I have existing points on here, and so I'm just going to go ahead and cut those off. Make sure you're always safe with the knife. Make sure that you're cutting away from yourself and paying attention and knowing how sharp your knife is, so just always be careful when you're using a knife. Okay, so now that we have cut our existing nocking points off, this is a good point to tell you if you are moving your nocking points, you've already tied your nocking points and determined through tuning that things need to move still, I would suggest keeping one of the nocking points in its current position and cutting off the other one. That way you know how far you're moving. It's easy to check with how many strands you're moving, if you can see the strands. If not, I do recommend making sure that you keep one of the nocking points just so that you can see how far you're moving, and then kind of adjust where your bear shaft is tuning at 30 meters. So after I've cut off the nocking points, I want to make sure that I have everything clear. Also, a good point to make is that you want to make sure that everything's stable. So I've stabilized on the table with some Excel sites, but also you want to make sure that everything's staying still, especially when using a knife or an open flame. You want to make sure that everything's stable so you're not surprised by moving objects. So next what we're going to use is a T-square. So I use a Spigarelli T-square. Mine comes handy with a Hulk sticker as well as a zebra sticker. So if somebody's running around with my T-square, I know it's mine and not theirs. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this onto the string. It's going to click on, and then what I'm going to do is put it on top of the plunger button and then up against the rest. So what I do to check that it's in the right position is I lift my T-square up, and if it goes straight back down onto the rest, then I know it's in the right place. So now I know I'm too far down because it pushes that rest back in like that. So you want to make sure that you kind of adjust that a little bit, and so it lightly grazes my rest like that. That's what you want it to do. So now on mine, I have marked where I want the top of my bottom nocking point, but it depends on your preference, how high you need to go on your nocking points. You can change which reference points you've got. So for mine, it's going to be 1/16 above is kind of where we're, or 1/32 above on this T-square is where the top of my bottom nocking point is going to be. So determine where you're gonna need to put your nocking points. This is a position that I know I've already tuned and I know already works for me. So make sure that when you're tuning, you tie these and then you look at where your tune is and then cut them off and tie them again. The risk you run if you push your nocking points is that you're going to separate your serving. You want to make sure your serving is nice and tight, but also if you're trying to have light nocking points that move, you run the risk of separating that center serving, and then your nocking points aren't going to do anything for you. If they're moving, they're not going to help you at all know your position. You're going to get a different tune each time. So make sure that you tie your nocking points each time that you change your tune. So first we're going to start with an overhand knot, which eventually turns into a square knot, but the way you would explain an overhand knot would be the way you start your shoes when you're tying them. So sneakers, you're going to take one on the right side and go over the one on the left side, underneath and through, and that is an overhand knot. So what we're going to do is we're going to do that around the string. So I'm going to go through where my T-square is, around the string. So again, we're going to go over like that and then tie it down. And this is where the positioning comes into play, where my nocking point is. So we're going to keep it loose and then move it to that line that I've already determined is where my nocking point goes, and then I can go ahead and cinch it. So power grip is really good at grabbing onto the serving, so you don't need to pull it really tight. Again, you're running the risk of splitting your serving, so I just want to make sure it's snug, and it will tighten over on its own just because of the knot that we tie as a square knot. So again, to make a square knot around the string, you're going to do the same thing you did the first time, and you're going to go and take that right one, go underneath the left one and pull that through, and then I'm going to cinch that underneath that pre-existing knot. And again, just a nice firm tightening. You don't need to really yank on it too much, but again, just make sure it's snug. Okay, so now we're going to determine which strand we're going to use to tie the rest of the nocking point. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this one to tie the rest of the serving, and how I know that is that this strand actually goes in between the two that are already laid down. This one kind of sticks out a little bit more, so I like to use the one that kind of goes with the flow, that's going to be the smoothest nocking point, because I like my nocking points to look pretty, but it also helps everything stay tight as you work with your nocking points. So we're just going to lay this one down, and what we're going to do with this one is it's just basically going to be a tail, so it's going to just hang out right there. So we're going to wrap. I usually wrap about 5 times, or about, if you want to be really technical, it's about 1/8 of an inch there. And then what we're going to do is what's called back serving. So what we're going to do is make a loop with the remaining serving. And then the way you know that you're back serving correctly is if it's on the opposite side that you've been winding from. So this is on the right side of the string away from me, and then this one is going to go on the side that's closest to me. So then you're going to again rotate around the string back towards your nocking point. So again, 4 or 5 rotations should do it. And then you're going to lay that remaining piece down over where your nocking point is. You want to make sure that there's no gaps on this part of the serving in between what you've already tied and what you're about to tie. So then next you're going to lay that all the way up against what you've already served. And as you rotate on this side unties. So you just wrap that. You want to keep a good amount of tension. You don't need to yank on it again, but you want to make sure that it stays tight so that you're not losing any tension that you've created. So then you're going to pull the remaining slack that was left from back serving. So just like that. So if you look, there are a couple of tiny gaps here between the serving. So what I like to do is take my handy dandy T-square, and I like to cinch that up. So what we're going to do, since it's still relatively loose on the nocking point, we're going to press, and you see those little lines, those gaps, cinch together. And then you're going to push just a little bit on that top side because you don't want to move what you've determined is your correct nocking space, but you also want to make sure that everything's uniforming and together. So then what you do is you take the remaining tails, and it's okay to go ahead and cinch down. Again, you don't need to pull too hard, especially if you wrap the serving around your fingers like I did. You don't want to create any creases in your hands. I didn't, and it doesn't take that much tension to pull it, especially when you're using this power grip. It likes to hold on really tight. Our final two steps are going to be cutting the tails, because you don't want to have these guys on the string when you're shooting. I think that would be pretty painful for those strings to hit you in the face. So we're going to cut those really quick, and then we're also going to burn the ends. So what I like to do is, again, just have a little bit of a tail. Again, always cut away from yourself. So you just have a little bitty remnant there. We're going to do the same here. So you've got those two little pieces there. Gonna use a lighter and gonna have that burn. I like to burn mine a little bit longer, that way I can press against it and then it just conforms to the rest of the serving that's already there. Same thing with this bottom one. And there you have, for mine, my bottom nocking point. So just to like cue you guys into something that is a huge pet peeve of mine, especially if you share a range with someone else or other people or a local range, you want to make sure that you take care of your remnants. These little strands are going to be really pesky for somebody to find on the floor, so make sure that you're standing next to a trash can or you collect them and throw them away later. Our next part of our nock tying is going to be, for me, my top nocking point. Again, these don't have to be put on in any particular order. You can put your top one on first and then your bottom one. If you need to move them around, totally acceptable. So for my top one, I want to go ahead and put my arrow onto the string. So I'm going to make sure that it is on the string and up against that bottom nocking point. I like to put mine under my clicker, that way it doesn't move around up and down too much. And it stays put for me to tie that top nocking point accurately. So again, same process as what you did for the bottom one, just an overhand knot, snug it down, another overhand knot underneath, snug it down. Again, I've determined, based on the way that this serving is laying, this is going to be my tail. It's going to hang off to the side, and then this one's going to lay over. And another note on this tail, you'll notice after I'm done wrapping and I start to do my, my back serving, the reason why I do that is, again, to make sure that my center serving doesn't split. That's something that's super important to me. I know it's important to a lot of my other teammates as well, because we'll use a center serving for half a season at least. So you don't want to use it too much and then have it split, because then you're going to have to just be constantly tying nocking points. When you tie a center serving and then tie nocking points, you want that sucker to last as long as you possibly can, because it is a little bit of a tedious task, especially if your center serving is moving. Then you have to completely retune after you tie a new center serving. Again, personal preference comes into play here, because some people like a longer nocking point, just like to have a bulkier nocking point. I personally just like to have it enough to where it's not moving and that it's a good indicator of where my knot needs to go. So again, that 1/4 inch size is just perfect for me. Sometimes a little bit longer. This top one's going to turn out just a little bit longer than the bottom one. But what you want to be looking for when you put the nock on and you have the nock on to secure your other nocking point after you've tied one and then you're securing the other, is you don't want to have what you see right now with all this space. If you see, there's quite a bit of movement there between my top and bottom nocking point. So what I want to do is I want to push that arrow all the way up against that bottom nocking point, and then we're going to just so slightly encourage that nocking point down onto the top of that nock. Notice when I turn the center serving that it's not inhibiting the turn of the string. When those nocking points are cinching down onto that nock, it's not inhibiting that turn, because you don't want it to be so tight that there's no space, but you want it to be touching that nock, because what it'll do is when you shoot, it'll create its own space. Your nock will over time create the space that it needs on the string. You don't really need to give it a bunch of space, because then once it creates its own space, it'll be way too much and you'll have more movement on your string than you need. So again, we're just going to finish by pushing that back served portion up on the rest of the nocking point. You want to make sure there's no gaps. We don't see any gaps here. So then you want to again take your arrow off, and then pull those two sides together. And they're kind of tightening on themselves because you've got your back serve piece and then you've got your tied piece. So they're kind of just squishing together real nice so that they sit there tight on the string. Have those little bitty tails left off. Again, throw these away. And then we're going to take our lighter and get those ends. Make sure that they are good to go. There we go. Now you've got two tied nocking points. All right, thanks for joining us today. I hope you learned how to put nocking points on your bow. You've been here before, you know what to do. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe on Lancaster's archery page. Make sure that you hit that notification bell as well if you want to see more videos. Thank you guys for joining us today. Have a great day. It drives me insane. Insane, yeah. Under the radar, it'll get through. Also subscribe to Lancaster's page on YouTube. Again, just absolute garbage. I just keep like, okay, that'll be in the blooper reel for sure.